Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am so glad you are joining us today because we are getting into something that honestly blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, it is a really wild topic today.
It really is. So our source material for this deep dive is a set of notes titled Day 19 Integrals, Theory, Domains, Code.
Which sounds very academic, I know.
Right, it sounds like a calculus textbook. But our mission today is to look at this one purely mathematical concept, the indefinite integral, and specifically this mysterious constant that gets added to it called plus c.
The infamous plus C.
Exactly. And we're going to see how this single abstract letter basically defines reality across rocket science, circuit boards, and even your bank account.
It is everywhere once you know what to look for.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are basically going on a detective hunt today to track down a missing piece of information that engineers are constantly trying to find. But to understand why it goes missing in the first place, we have to talk about the amnesia of mathematics.
That is a great way to put it. The amnesia.
Yeah, like what is inherently lossy about tracking a rate of change?
Well, the amnesia starts with the mathematical engine we actually use to find that rate of change in the first place, which is differentiation.
Right.
In calculus, differentiation is how we isolate motion. You take a foundational function, right, one that describes a static state of reality,
Okay.
and you take its derivative to find the target function, which represents the rate of change.
So imagine you are standing on the side of a pitch-black highway at midnight.
Okay, I am picturing it.
You have a radar gun in your hand. A car goes flying past you in the dark. The radar gun clocks it perfectly at 80 miles per hour.
Spot on.
You know exactly how fast that car is moving.
Yeah.
You know how its position is changing in that exact millisecond.
But that is all you know.
Exactly. Because it's completely dark. If someone asks you, hey, where exactly is that car right now? What city is it in? What mile marker did it start from? You'd have absolutely no idea.
None at all.
You have the rate of change, but the absolute position is just gone.
It is lost to the void. You captured this flawless measurement of a dynamic event, but you have zero context for its static reality.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that this mathematical amnesia isn't a glitch. It is a profound vulnerability when you try to run the process in reverse.
Right, when you try to integrate.
Exactly. Integration is fundamentally evaluated as the inverse of differentiation. It is an antiderivative.
So you would think, logically, if I integrate my rate of change data, I should get my original reality back perfectly.
You would think so, but you don't. The mathematical formula states that integrating a target function gives you the foundational function back, but you are forced to add this plus c. That c stands for a constant.
Because differentiation destroyed that static information in the first place.
It ruthlessly deletes it. I mean, think about the fundamental rules of calculus. If you take the derivative of any constant value, a flat, unchanging number.
Like 5 or a million.
Right, or 0. The derivative is always 0. A constant, by definition, does not change.
Yeah, its rate of change is 0.
Exactly. If you plot a constant on a graph, it's just a perfectly horizontal flat line. The slope is 0.
So if I'm walking at a steady pace of 3 miles an hour, my rate of change is 3.
Right.
And if I started at my front door, or if I started 10 miles down the road at a coffee shop, my speed is still 3.
Yes.
The radar gun only registers the 3. It literally has no mechanism to care about my starting address.
And so when you reverse the operation through integration, your exact static reference baseline is completely unrecoverable from the rate of change data alone.
Wow.
The radar gun data cannot magically reconstruct your home address. The math itself has forgotten where you started because the derivative of your starting position was 0.
Trying to visualize this is just wild.
Yeah.
Because by adding this plus c, we aren't just drawing one line to represent our reconstructed reality.
No, you are drawing an infinite stack of lines. Geometrically, if you graph the indefinite integral, you create an infinite family of parallel curves.
An infinite family.
Every single curve in this infinite family shares the exact same slope trajectory at any given coordinate. They all wiggle and bend in the exact same way.
Okay, it's like a flock of birds flying in perfect synchronized formation.
Oh, I like that.
They're all making the exact same swoops and dives at the exact same time.
Oh,
The shape of their flight is mathematically identical.
right.
But one bird is flying at 100 feet in the air, another's at 200 feet, another is at 5,000 feet. The math dictates the synchronized swoops, but it cannot tell you which specific altitude your specific bird is flying at.
That visualization hits the nail on the head. You just have a sky full of infinite possibilities. The rate of change data gives you the shape of the flight path. Only the plus c anchors that flight path to a specific altitude.
Without it, you are basically unmoored from absolute reality.
Entirely unmoored.
And being unmoored from reality might be a fun philosophical puzzle for us right now, but it sounds like an absolute nightmare if you are an aerospace engineer trying to put a multi-million-dollar satellite into orbit.
Oh, it is a massive constraint.
Let's move out of abstract geometry and into physical space.
Hmm.
How does this impact rockets?
Well, it is the defining constraint of telemetry and inertial navigation. When a rocket or a spacecraft needs to figure out where it is and where it is going, the onboard sensors do not measure absolute position.
Right.
They rely heavily on accelerometers.
Which measure acceleration, obviously. Because you can physically feel that force. Like when you step on the gas pedal in your car, you are pushed back in your seat.
Exactly. The rocket feels its own thrust. The onboard accelerometers measure the instantaneous axial acceleration over time.
Okay.
But knowing how hard the engines are pushing does not tell the navigation computer how fast the vehicle is actually traveling through the atmosphere.
Wait, really?
Yeah, to find the relative velocity profile, the engineers have to mathematically integrate that acceleration data.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this for a second, because this feels like a massive oversight for a billion-dollar space program.
Fair enough.
If a rocket relies on accelerometers, why don't they just use GPS to find their absolute speed and position? I mean, we have satellites in space right now that can track my phone on a highway. Why do they have to integrate acceleration in the first place?
That is a great question. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you hit on the central vulnerability of spaceflight.
Okay.
GPS is incredible, but it relies on an external signal from a constellation of satellites. When a rocket is launching, it experiences extreme conditions.
Like what?
During certain phases of flight, like punching through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, or during re-entry, a plasma sheath actually forms around the vehicle.
Woo.
Yeah, and that plasma blocks radio frequency signals completely. It is a phenomenon called ionization blackout.
So it goes completely dark to the outside world.
Exactly. Furthermore, if you are sending a probe into deep space or operating a military vehicle that might face signal jamming, you cannot rely on external validation at all.
The vehicle must be autonomous.
Right. Inertial navigation has to be entirely self-contained.
So the rocket has to figure out its speed using only the tools inside its own hull. And the only thing it can feel internally is its own thrust.
Which brings us right back to the amnesia of calculus. To find the velocity profile, you integrate the acceleration.
Right.
But doing so yields a velocity function plus c.
There it is.
In aerospace telemetry, that integration constant maps directly to the initial velocity state of the vehicle. It is the baseline speed it was traveling before the tracking system started measuring.
Okay, so if the telemetry system boots up while the rocket is just bolted down to the launch pad in Florida, the baseline velocity is 0.
Yes.
The plus c is just 0.
But imagine a scenario where the navigation computer experiences a microsecond power fault.
Oh, no.
It reboots, and a secondary tracking system kicks in right during a multi-stage ignition. The rocket is already screaming through the upper atmosphere at Mach 1.
Right?
The accelerometer just feels the new thrust from the second stage. It has zero awareness of the Mach 1 speed that was achieved before the reboot.
It is the radar gun all over again. It just measures the new push.
Exactly. The system has to be explicitly programmed with its boundary values. If the engineers do not rigorously initialize that baseline state, if they lose track of the true plus c, the entire telemetry calculation detaches from reality.
That is terrifying.
The rocket's computer will think it's going much slower than it actually is. It will burn the engines for too long and send the payload into a catastrophic trajectory.
Wow. So the rocket is totally blind to its own history unless that history is explicitly anchored?
Precisely.
We see this play out on a massive scale with rockets and millions of pounds of thrust. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What happens when we remove the physical size?
Zooming in.
Right, if we zoom all the way down to the microscopic level, into the invisible flow of electronics, does this mathematical constraint still dictate reality?
It dominates it. The microelectrical world provides a beautiful parallel. Let's consider an operational amplifier integration circuit or a constant current source charging a decoupling capacitor on a high-density circuit board.
Okay, usually when people talk about capacitors, they use the analogy of a bucket. You pour water in, which is the electrical current, and the bucket holds the charge.
Right, that is the standard analogy, but I actually prefer to think of the dielectric material inside a capacitor less like a bucket and more like a dense sponge.
Sponge?
Yeah, because a bucket can be tipped upside down and completely emptied. But a sponge is different. The dielectric substrate is an insulating material sandwiched between two conductive plates. When you apply current, you create an electric field that polarizes the molecules in the sponge.
Okay. And the current entering that sponge defines the instantaneous rate of change of the voltage across the plates.
Yes.
So the flow of electrons is our radar gun again.
Exactly. The math dictates that current is equal to the capacitance multiplied by the derivative of the voltage with respect to time.
Got it.
So if an electronics engineer wants to know the actual voltage in the circuit at any given microsecond, they have to run the exact same mathematical operation the rocket did.
They solve for voltage by integrating the current.
Yes. And once again, they get the integrated function plus c.
What does that plus c represent physically in a microscopic piece of dielectric material?
It is the trapped residual voltage.
Oh.
Going back to the sponge analogy, even if you squeeze that sponge as hard as you can to wring it out, there is often a residual dampness left behind.
It's never perfectly dry.
Exactly. In a capacitor, the polarization of the dielectric molecules does not always snap back to absolute zero perfectly. A ghost charge remains trapped in the substrate prior to time zero, before you ever applied the new current.
So if you are designing a highly sensitive piece of medical equipment, say a pacemaker, that relies on an integration circuit to trigger a heartbeat,
Right.
you can't just assume the sponge is totally dry when the device turns on.
You absolutely cannot make that assumption. The current waveform you push into the system dictates how the voltage is going to change from that moment forward.
The rate of change.
But the absolute real-world voltage that the patient's heart actually experiences depends entirely on that initial state of charge. If there is a leftover residual voltage, a ghost charge you didn't account for, your entire voltage calculation is shifted up or down the vertical axis.
The whole flock of birds is flying at the wrong altitude.
Yes. The circuit triggers at the wrong threshold because the mathematical baseline was a fiction. You have to physically discharge the capacitor to force it to a known zero or measure the trapped charge explicitly.
It is the exact same problem as the rocket staging at Mach 1, just happening at the scale of electrons.
The math enforces the same boundary rules on a microscopic dielectric as it does on a multi-ton spacecraft. The derivative loses the history, and the integral demands you provide it.
Okay, we've established that physical hardware, whether a rocket or a circuit, suffers from this physical ghost charge amnesia.
Yeah.
But what happens when we remove physics entirely? Does a purely digital environment, one constructed entirely out of code, escape the plus C problem?
It actually becomes even more critical in digital architecture, specifically in high-throughput database design or financial ledger systems.
Like the servers running major banking apps or massive tech platforms.
Exactly. In traditional, simpler databases, the architecture uses a model called CRUD, create, read, update, delete.
Right, the standard.
If you deposit $50, the database just overwrites your old balance with the new balance. The absolute current state is stored directly.
Which seems efficient, but if the system crashes or a cell gets corrupted, that absolute number is just gone. You have no way of knowing how you arrived at that number.
Exactly. Which is why highly robust systems use a totally different architecture called event sourcing.
Okay, how does that work?
In event sourcing, the database does not store the absolute state. It records an immutable stream of deltas, or transactions.
So it just logs the changes.
Right. It logs a plus $100, then a minus $45, then a plus $20. It is a pure ledger of changes.
So when you check your banking app, the bank isn't necessarily just looking up a single stored number with your total. It's mathematically integrating your entire transaction history from a genesis state.
Yes, exactly. To find your actual current bank balance, the banking system has to process that stream of changes over time. It essentially runs a discrete integration. The current state equals the sum of all the delta events, plus C.
Let's walk through a scenario to see how this mechanism actually saves the system. Say it's payday and millions of transfers are hitting a bank's servers all at once. Suddenly, a server rack loses power right in the middle of processing.
In a traditional overwrite database, that power failure is a disaster. You don't know whose balances were updated and whose weren't. The data is in a corrupted state.
Right.
But with event sourcing, the system just boots back up, looks at the immutable log of delta events that successfully recorded, and mathematically integrates them forward. The system can perfectly reconstruct the truth.
Because it kept all the math.
But, and this is the massive catch, it can only do that if it securely knows the baseline.
The plus C.
In this digital domain, the plus C represents the genesis snapshot, or the initialization seed balance. The delta stream tells you the exact trajectory of your spending and earning.
But you cannot deduce an absolute user account balance without anchoring all of those changes to the original starting point.
Right. If the delta stream says your account gained $50 total over the week, that's great.
Yeah.
But if your seed balance was 0, you have $50. If your seed balance was negative 1,000, you are still in debt.
The system guarantees a perfectly auditable trail of change. You can trace every penny moving, but it is utterly useless without the Genesis snapshot.
The underlying logic is identical across all 3 domains. The rocket needs the launch velocity, the circuit needs the residual voltage, and the database needs the seed balance.
So how do engineers lock this down mathematically? I mean, how do they visualize this gap between the math and reality to ensure they have the right baseline?
This is where computational verification comes into play. Modern engineers don't just guess. They use code to map out the possibilities. Python is particularly powerful for this, using a combination of libraries to bridge the gap between theoretical math and visual analysis.
The source material specifically mentions the core engine for this is a library called SIMPy.
Yes, SIMPy stands for Symbolic Python. Standard calculators or basic code libraries use floating point numbers to estimate integrals.
Like drawing tiny boxes under the curve to guess the area.
Exactly, they use numerical methods. SIMPy is fundamentally different. It performs algebraic manipulation. It can take a complex, custom polynomial expression representing our rate of change and mathematically calculate the true, exact, indefinite integral formula.
It analytically finds the shape of the flock of birds. It finds the big f of x equation.
Right.
But pure mathematics can't solve for c. SIMPy still spits out an equation with a dangling unknown variable at the end.
Which is why the engineer pairs SIMPy with a plotting library called matplotlib. The script takes the pure algebraic formula from SIMPy and uses matplotlib to map out and visually render the vertically shifted family of curves on the screen.
So put yourself in the shoes of an engineer sitting at a workstation. You run this verification script, and instead of the computer giving you the answer, your screen fills up with dozens of identical, parallel, wavy lines stacked on top of each other.
It's beautiful but frustrating.
The Python script is drawing out every possible reality. It is literally visualizing the amnesia of the derivative. So what does this all mean?
This raises an important question. The math brings you to the edge of the cliff and stops. SIMPy proves that pure logic alone cannot isolate reality. The engineer stares at a stack of infinite possibilities.
Right.
To collapse those infinite curves into one singular true reality, they have to rely on empirical observation.
You have to physically go measure the launch pad. You have to physically probe the capacitor for ghost charges. You have to query the secure Genesis snapshot.
Yes. The math dictates the shape of the universe, but human observation is the only thing that anchors it to reality. You have to capture a known data point from the physical world, outside the rate of change data, and feed it back into the script to choose the correct curve.
Let's bring this all together. We have traversed the abstract geometry of parallel curves, the high-stakes telemetry of hypersonic rockets, the trapped ghost charges in microscopic dielectrics, and the immutable ledgers tracking digital wealth.
It really is everywhere. The unifying thread across every domain is that understanding the rate of change, the derivative, the delta, the thrust, the current, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It is the engine of all dynamic analysis, but it is only ever half the story.
Whether you are trying to achieve orbit, stabilize a pacemaker, or recover a crashed database, you can never escape the need to know your origin point. Knowing how fast you are going is meaningless if you don't know where you started.
Exactly.
The plus C isn't just some mathematical formality left over from a high school calculus test. It is the anchor of absolute reality.
And if you extrapolate that concept to the largest possible scale, it leaves us with a rather profound philosophical puzzle.
Oh, I love these. Lay it on me.
Think about modern cosmology. We know our entire universe is constantly expanding and changing.
Right.
But when our telescopes look out into the deep void, observing the redshift of distant galaxies, they are fundamentally just measuring the current rates of change of those galaxies flying apart.
Oh, wow. We are measuring the cosmic derivative.
Exactly. We have incredible radar guns pointed at the night sky. We know the slope of the universe's expansion, but if we can only measure the dynamic rate at which the universe is changing right now...
Is there a cosmic plus C?
Right. Is there an absolute initial baseline state of the entire universe, the original Genesis snapshot of the singularity that is fundamentally mathematically unrecoverable from our current observations alone?
Are we just standing on a pitch-black cosmic highway, pointing a telescope into the dark, perfectly measuring the speed of galaxies flying past us, but fundamentally blind to the true original starting line?
The math says we might be.
That is a haunting thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you look at a bank statement, or watch a rocket launch, or even just drive down a dark highway, keep an eye out for the hidden plus C's in your own life. Until next time.